Hello everybody and welcome back to the 1798 Rebellion class. Now, where we left off last time was we were looking at the defeat on Vinegar Hill. Now, we also had looked at Wexford and Scull-na-Bog and the Wexford Bridge, and we also moved on to the defeat on Vinegar Hill. Now, in the last class we were talking about how the rebels, 20,000 of them, were up on Vinegar Hill and they had been cornered by the British forces. Now, if it hadn't been for Needham's Gap, they wouldn't have escaped, leading to only 1,000 casualties over the 20,000 soldiers that were there. Now, that wasn't the only casualties caused that day. There was a further 100 casualties in a local hospital in Enniscorthy, which the British burned to the ground, and there was other smaller events that happened other than Vinegar Hill that day. Now, in today's class, we're going to take a look at what happened after Vinegar Hill and how the different soldiers dispersed and how it led to different guerrilla groups. So, as always, we're going to start with our learning outcomes. So, at the end of today's class, we should know what happened to the rebels after Vinegar Hill. We should also know who led the rebellion in Antrim and what happened. We should also know who led the rebellion in Down and what happened, so Antrim and Down. And we should know where the French forces landed and what happened to it. Now, after the retreat from Vinegar Hill, the rebel army split and left. Now, Michael Dwyer was one of those soldiers or leaders who fled to the Wicklow Mountains. And from the Wicklow Mountains, they created guerrilla attacks or guerrilla warfare against the British soldiers, launching small militia groups to cause havoc to the movements of the army and their mailing services, so they couldn't send post around the country and they couldn't get munitions. Dwyer continued to fight from the mountains until 1803. Now, it wasn't just himself, it was a whole battalion or a small group of soldiers who were living up in the Wicklow Mountains, and they would come down from the mountains and launch attacks against British soldiers. Now, they were highly feared and highly wanted, and this is why you can see a wanted poster down here. And at the time, there was a bounty on his head for, I think it was the equivalent of £10, which would have been huge back in the day. Now, at this time, some rebels tried to spread the rebellion west, and Father Murphy, who was known for sparking the rebellion in Outlard Hill, was captured in Carlow and hung. This appeared to bring an end to the rebellion. Rebellions in the north of Ireland also failed at this time. However, there will be a twist in the tale, as we will see when the French landed in the west coast of Ireland. But Ireland's best chance of success died with the defeat of the Wexford rebels on Vinegar Hill. And now we're going to take a quick look at the rebellions that happened up in Northern Ireland. Now, as we know, Northern Ireland was a stronghold for the Irish Volunteers until 1797, where under the command of General Lake and the new Insurrection Act passed down by the British government, General Lake was able to go in and execute the different leaders of the Irish Volunteers and seize their weapons, which drove most of the Irish Volunteers and the defenders down south, where they joined forces with other militia groups. Now, there still was a few Irish volunteers and defenders still in Northern Ireland, and after they seen the rebellion breaking out down in Wexford, they seen this as a movement that they could get behind, and they started their own rebellion in Northern Ireland as well at the same time. The first Northern Rebellion happened here in County Antrim, and it was led by Henry Joy McCracken. Now, the rebels or defenders decided to attack Antrim over Belfast because Belfast was far too defended, and it was the most heavily defended, or one of the most heavily defended areas in all of Ireland. So they chose Antrim instead, as they thought their success rate would be far higher. Small towns and villages around the town were captured first before they attacked Antrim town. However, Henry Joy McCracken's plans on a rebellion in Antrim were failed by a betrayal of spies who leaked the information to the British Army and told them of all their plans. This led to them being defeated on the 7th of June after the neighbouring towns broke down, and led to an unsuccessful rebellion in Antrim. Now, on the following day, on the 8th of June, a rebellion took place in County Down. Now, at the start of this rebellion, there was no leadership and no one taking charge of the rebels, but later a Scottish merchant named Henry Munro agreed to lead this rebellion. Now, on the 12th of June, basically the British burnt down all the towns that were sympathetic to the rebels, and they went through all the different towns, burning them as they went, as you can see in this image here. And this was known as the Battle of Ballydehinch, and this was on the 12th of June this took place. Now, they surrendered on the 13th of June, and 2 days later Munro was executed after the Battle of Ballydehinch. Henry Joy McCracken was arrested when he was trying to escape to flee to America. Now, if you remember, he was one of the leaders in Antrim. So when they found that he was trying to escape, he was arrested and later was executed in July. On the 22nd of August 1798, French forces under the leadership of General Humbert landed in Killala Bay in County Mayo. Now, these were French soldiers, about 1,000 soldiers landed on the bay. Now, there was much confusion to the people of Mayo at the time, who were predominantly Irish speaking and didn't understand why the French were landing here. But they did have a successful landing, and they did take over some local villages. So at the time, the French had one of the best armies in the world, and 1,000 of these troops had landed here in Killala. Now, straight away, very early on, they took over Ballina, and they moved on to Castlebar, where they drove out a much larger English troops, or a much bigger army of English troops. Now, after taking over Castlebar, they drove the remaining British out of Castlebar, and this was known as the Races of Castlebar. And here we can see the French marching in and the British soldiers fleeing to neighbouring towns. Now, here we can see that we have gone through most of the learning outcomes. We should now know what happened to the rebels at Vinegar Hill, or what happened to the rebels after Vinegar Hill. We should also know who led the rebellion of Antrim and Down, and we should also understand where the French forces landed and what happened to them. Now, we'll be going more into what happened to them in the next class. It's just we didn't have enough time in this PowerPoint. Okay, best of luck, guys.